I'm not sure if you know this already, but the US dollar is not the strongest currency in the world. In fact, the US dollar is considered only the 10th strongest world currency, right after the Swiss franc and the euro. In it, the 5th through 7th strongest currencies, we have the British pound, the Gibraltar pound, and Cayman Islands dollar. And in at number 1 through 4 for strongest world currencies, we have the Kuwaiti dinar, Bahraini dinar, Omani rial, and the Jordanian dinar. This is interesting to me because I don't usually think of these 4 small Middle Eastern countries when I think of the countries that are pushing for world dominance. I usually think of the big ideological chest puffers like China, the US, and maybe Russia. These are the countries that are aiming for world dominance in the media. America first, Russia first, China first. But the reality is that the strongest currencies will have nothing to do with political chest puffing. In fact, the strongest currencies are typically backed by the strongest and most stable economies, which will typically follow the strongest and most stable places for having a business, which typically are as far away from politics as possible. In fact, those places will often not let you open a bank account in their country if you're from a country that doesn't meet their very high standards. Singapore and the UAE are both competing for that kind of reputation. So let's talk about what makes the top 4 currency nations unique compared to the rest of the world. The first thing you may have already noticed is that these 4 countries are all traditional Arabic monarchies. While the hijab isn't mandatory for women in these countries, it's strongly encouraged as part of the culture. Men typically have the upper hand in workforce and family affairs. Drinking alcohol or wearing shorts outside is illegal or limited in most cases. Having sex outside of marriage is illegal. And being LGBTQ is either illegal or limited, at least publicly. So because they're religious monarchies, the ability to speak freely against their kingdoms or criticize Islam is also going to be generally limited. The second thing that you'll notice about these countries, more so the top 3 countries of Kuwait, Bahrain, and Oman, but to a lesser extent Jordan, is that while all these countries have a strict and by Western standards harsh judicial system that follows Sharia law and sometimes results in death or severe punishment for seemingly small crimes, the incarceration rate in these countries is actually pretty low. It's very rare that you'll see violent crimes in any of these countries, and especially in the top 3 countries that I mentioned, they're considered some of the safest countries in the world by all metrics. The third thing you'll notice about all these countries is that they barely tax their citizens relative to other countries. Individuals are taxed nada in the top 3 countries, while Jordanians are taxed progressively starting from when they make about $7,000 annually at a rate of 5%. Property taxes are 0 in all these countries too, with the exception of that in Jordan, you might actually have to pay property taxes depending on the jurisdiction that you're in on any property that's worth about $211,000 or more. The fourth thing that you'll notice in all these countries is that they all have either very low corporate taxes or 0 corporate taxes except for certain businesses or transactions. And in fact, these monarchies will often give incentives to businesses to come and operate in their countries rather than taxing them. So then you might ask me, how then do these monarchies have the money to spend on all the infrastructure and the justice systems that they have in place for both individuals and businesses? And that brings us up to number 5. The fifth thing that you'll notice is that all these countries are mostly rich in oil, gas, and other minerals, and their governments are unique in that they rely mostly in their investments of their in-house valuable resources to power their economies and provide the kind of value that you can tell has brought their citizens so much relative stability over the years. The sixth thing you'll notice is that all these countries have extensive welfare programs for their citizens powered by their kingdom's wealth, unlike other countries that rely heavily on taxpayer funds. So in all these countries, the kingdom either straight up pays for subsidized healthcare and welfare programs, or they'll subsidize it. And they have all kinds of programs for low-income families in all these countries in some form. Kuwait, Bahrain, Oman, Jordan, and they also place priorities for people that are citizens of those countries to receive certain benefits. The seventh thing that you'll notice about all these countries is that relative to other countries in the world, they're pretty strict or at least highly regulated with their immigration. If you want to visit, you'll have to either apply for a visa online or in person, and while it's pretty straightforward from what I understand to apply for a visa and get it, they still have very long and stringent processes for naturalization, or in the case that you want to stay or be a citizen of their country. So someone might ask me, well, Pardes, who would want to be a citizen of a country where you can't be gay, or you can't drink alcohol, or you can't wear shorts in public, or what I'm wearing? And the answer is a lot of people. These countries attract a ton of refugees from all over the Middle East, India, Pakistan, and East Asia, people who are already traditional and family oriented, but would benefit greatly from the tremendous job and business security and the opportunities and the financial stability that these countries have to offer them. But it also won't be easy to gain entry into these countries as a worker, especially if you don't already have a local sponsor. Oman, for example, has something called Omanization, which is basically a set of policies aimed at prioritizing just Omani citizens for work opportunities and only giving a limited number of work visas to foreigners. And then the other top 4 countries that we mentioned also have similar policies in place. So I know what you might be thinking next. How will these economies survive long term if they have such stringent immigration policies in place? And that brings us to the final commonality. Because of the emphasis placed on family and traditional life in the cultures of these countries compared to other wealthy nations, these countries have a relatively high birth rate. To put it in perspective for you, Germany, which is considered a wealthy economy that's part of the EU, has a birth rate of 8.9 births per 1,000 people, while Oman has a birth rate of 23.6 births per every 1,000 people. They don't really need to add shaky foreigners to their labor and business force when it looks like they already have a perfectly healthy and new large population being added to their economy every year, which will actually share their goals and values and move their country in the direction that they would actually prefer relative to foreigners coming in and taking that spot. Now, none of the stuff that I'm saying is aimed at what I think is good or bad for you or your country or your life. That will really depend on your personal worldview and your personal opinion about things. But I do think that there's something to be learned from every country about things that have worked versus things that haven't worked. And I personally love the fact that some of these countries are so powerful and have such strict rules of law, but that they barely have to enforce it because of how much respect the people in those countries already seem to have for the law, as opposed to, let's say, a country like Iran or Russia or China, or even many Western countries lately, where the laws are so overly complicated, arbitrary, constantly changing around and being thrown around and manipulated to target political opponents of the people in power. I love that in the countries that hold the top 4 strongest currencies in the world, there seems to be a very strong and stable understanding between the people and their governments relative to other countries. And while these kingdoms do demand complete loyalty from their people, what the people get back is, to me, very worth it. A safe and stable country, 0 personal taxes, including 0 property taxes in most of these countries, comprehensive social welfare and healthcare benefits, pride in their country and their fellow people, strong passports, strong business incentives, and fantastic opportunities for growth. Personally, while wearing a hijab is actually no longer mandatory in any of these countries, I would gladly wear a hijab just to have access to such great benefits while I'm there. Hope you enjoyed this video and see you in the next one.